Hi, everyone. Welcome. Okay, I think it automatically starts recording, Leslie. I'm just going to recording our session. Hi, everyone. On behalf of Boston University Questrom School of Business, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dee Polat, Director of Alumni Engagement here at Questrom. Today's session is hosted by our Women in Business Alumni Council, a dedicated group of senior level alumni executives uniting their mission to support our students' career growth and success. During this session, we'll be focusing on difficult yet crucial conversations. Often, the challenge isn't knowing what to say, it's figuring out how to say it when the pressure is on. I wonder how many of us have ever walked away from a challenging conversation thinking, I should have said that. And perhaps in our minds, we deliver the perfect response, but just a little bit too late. I think that's a lot of us. And research shows that leaders who handle difficult conversations effectively build stronger teams, higher trust, and better long-term performance. And yet, most of us were never formally taught how to have these conversations. So it's truly a gift to have Leslie with us today to help equip us with the skills that we need to successfully navigate difficult conversations and situations. First, a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be shared post-event along with a feedback survey. We will allot 15 minutes at the end of this session for your questions, but you're welcome to submit them throughout the session using the Q&A chat function. This will help me sequence the questions in a coherent way following Leslie's presentation. So I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who has not only studied this topic deeply, but lived it in real leadership environments. And as I introduce her, I invite all of you to take just 10 seconds to think about one conversation that you've been avoiding and what's making it hard. And as you listen to Leslie's insights, consider how her approach might directly apply to you and your situation. Leslie is the VP of Talent at Merge. She has spent her career within human resources across the healthcare and marketing industries. At Merge, she leads learning and organizational development, rewards and recognition, engagement, and chairs Merge's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. She's passionate about creating meaningful training programs and helping to bring growth opportunities to diversity of people. Leslie also sits on Boston Advisory Board for Career Spring, a not-for-profit organization helping first-generation students and graduates find meaningful employment. A lifelong learner, she holds her senior professional HR certification from the HR Certification Institute and has been named an HR Rising Star by the HR Executive magazine. And she's part of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce's Future Leader Certification Program and Transformational DE&I Certification Program. She's a proud double terrier holding her MBA with a specialization in leadership and organizational transformation from Questrom, as well as a BA in psychology from the College of Arts and Sciences. She's also married to a fellow Questrom MBA alum and is mom to an energetic, Lego-loving toddler with another baby boy joining the family in just a few weeks. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Leslie.
Perfect. Thank you for that introduction. Let me get my screen set up, and Dee, you can let me know that everything looks good. Perfect. How's that looking? Okay. Dee, you're on mute, but I think you said looks good.
That looks perfect. I'm
Okay,
just going to kill
great.
my video. Okay. Instead of killing my video, I killed my audio. There we go.
Um, Thank you all for taking the time to join me for this lunch and learn. As Dee mentioned, as a proud double terrier, I'm really honored to be invited to talk to you on this topic. So thank you, Dee, and thank you, BU. And also for your continued interest in the topic as we needed to reschedule this session from last week. So I appreciate your patience. As Dee mentioned, I have spent my career in HR. I've been involved in everything from performance improvement plans, coachings, firings and layoffs, all of the difficult conversations. Now, I oversee learning and development, and I'm able to coach those in management or those who are new to people management on things like this. So let's go ahead and dive in. First, I want to say, these four areas came directly from your submitted questions. But I want to normalize, having these difficult conversations. The goal isn't to leave this conversation wanting more conflict, but I do hope that you leave feeling at least a little bit more confident within it, where I can share a couple of tools that you can lean on for when conflict inevitably finds you. I have found that both in my career and in coaching others, that anxiety around these conversations really comes when we're put on the spot. Maybe we don't have the right words to say. As Dee mentioned, hindsight's 2020. You think of the most perfect thing to say after you've left the conversation. Um, so the anxiety grows, and maybe we start to avoid having conversations that we really should be having. So let's normalize that these are conversations that happen just by being part of the working world. And as a manager, you are, as part of your job, you're going to be giving someone feedback. It might not be popular. We're never given the perfect team full of go-getters, rise and shiners, perfectionists. And as an employee, we're often met with a lot of situations that we need to navigate in order for our companies to continue to be the best fit for us and for our lifestyle and so forth. So, again, if we equip ourselves with some helpful phrases, maybe some frameworks and know-how, we can build that muscle memory and pivot these more seemingly personality-based conflict conversations to more skill-building challenges. And we had mentioned, Dee had mentioned this, I had mentioned as well. Why do we avoid these conversations? Well, they're scary, they're unpredictable. Maybe we're worried as an employee that we're going to bring something up that will be taken personally or poorly reflect the brand that we're building. And so, like this picture, the load feels really heavy when in actuality, these conversations really shouldn't be looked at as a zero-sum game. So throughout this entire conversation, I want us to think about something to keep us grounded, and that's clarity is kindness. Um, Not sure if you're familiar with Gallup. Gallup is a world-renowned analytics firm which specializes in employee engagement management and research. But managers account for 70% of the variance in team level engagement. And let's sit with that for a second. 70% of the variance in team level engagement. That's pretty significant. And when you think about team engagement, one of the biggest drivers of that is clear communication from our manager. In fact, as I was reading more of the information that Gallup was putting out, 42% they reported 42% of employee turnover is preventable. Sure. Of that group, nearly half reported that in the months leading up to an employee's exit, their manager never proactively talked about job satisfaction, their performance, what the future of the company looked like, things of that nature. And so as an employee, the weight of that avoidance starts to look like this person. We quietly start to resent our manager for not bringing things up and not asking questions. We experience burnout. Maybe our performance is reduced. There's definitely an erosion of trust. Um, and so going back to that Gallup research, it goes naturally to say teams with higher engagement outperform others on key business outcomes, higher productivity, lower absenteeism, higher customer loyalty, the list goes on and on. So whether the feedback is positive in the form of recognition or constructive, your direct reports want to know how they're doing. Clarity is kindness. So, whether you're a manager or not, let's, to Dee's point earlier, take that minute and think through conversations that we're avoiding. I have one-on-ones with my direct reports on a weekly basis, and giving constructive feedback is no one's favorite thing. And outside of the obvious times when I know I need to give them feedback on something, how do I know if I'm avoiding a conversation? One, my inner dialogue makes me start to feel resentful towards this person, or I'll start nitpicking other elements of their work. Maybe my feelings or emotions start to get in the way, and maybe I just want to shorten or cancel the one-on-ones altogether. I'm finding excuses not to meet with this person. Or um, conversely, maybe I'm complaining about this person to other trusted colleagues. But here's the thing. Doing these things, I'm becoming part of the problem. I'm now spending more mental energy working, thinking about this as opposed to working towards business results, or finding excuses why the employee's behavior isn't matching my expectations. So I'm avoiding. But when we avoid these hard or sometimes messy conversations, we're not just delaying discomfort, we're actively driving disengagement. We're lowering productivity, we're increasing stress and burnout, we're eroding trust. And these aren't soft outcomes, they translate into economic losses, weakened organizational performance. Again, the list goes on and on. So that's a lot to wrap our heads around. No wonder these conversations feel so heavy. But I feel like a little bit of preparation can really take us far. And so, what I wanted to do today is take you through two different models or two different frameworks, and then walk through several examples so you can see them in action. The first of which is the 4P framework. This one I really like when you are initiating or advocating for something. This is better for managing up, if you need to set some boundaries or you're navigating more peer-to-peer conflict. P is for purpose. What do you want from this conversation? So you're setting your intent. Next P, perspective. What might be true for the other person? And that's where empathy comes in. Next one, P for proof. What are the observable facts? And as we go through all of these exercises, as well as the other model that I'll take you through, we want to base as much as we can in facts as opposed to stories, feelings, or emotions. And then the final P, plan. What specific ask am I making? How will I start the conversation? So that's the 4P model, again, better for more peer-to-peer or when you're managing up and advocating for yourself. And then the DIME model, I'm a big fan of. For those who have access to LinkedIn Learning, this is actually where I first came across the DIME method. Um, and so you can certainly go and watch a little bit more through that platform. I often recommend this framework within my organization. It's really solid for managers to use when you're leading or trying to course correct. So D is for describe. It's saying what you see, stating the facts. Again, we're keeping everything as fact-based as possible. Something like, I've noticed you've been late to work a few days this week, and I want to sit down and see what's really going on. Um, it's talking through how performance differs from your expectations. Our workday starts at 9 a.m. I see you've been coming in at 10. It's sharing the impact and why that specific behavior is a problem. Because you're coming in at 10 a.m., the team is starting to fall behind on a deliverable that's due on Friday. And you always want to avoid judgment. As we talk about leading with empathy or assuming positive intent, so what I'll often go in with, I just want to check in and see if everything's okay. So then we pivot to inquire. Um, Coming out of describe, see what they initially come back with, but some great starter phrases for the inquire pillar is, I'm curious to know more about, or I'd like to talk about. What I've noticed is, walk me through what's happening, things along those lines. Then you state the problem. And then, most importantly, pause and listen and let the conversation unfold. What you may find is this person has been coming in at 10 every day, and you describe, you inquire, and they come back with, my car broke down last week. It's been in the shop ever since. I'm now relying on the T to get to work. And with the train schedule and the weather, I'm struggling to get my kids to school and then to get to the office on time. Okay, there is a very clear path forward. We now shift into manage. This is a short-term problem. So, as a manager, what flexibility can I offer to help get us through this and still meet our deadlines? Maybe it's providing some remote options or an adjusted schedule while they figure this out. And that also helps to build engagement. You're acknowledging that they have life outside of work. There's still work to be done, but you're giving them the flexibility, which takes a huge load off of their shoulders. Um, and so that's more of there's a personal issue going on outside of work. In situations where there's a performance issue or you need to provide feedback, this is also where you set ongoing expectations and you've identified the gap. How are you going to check in going forward? I always appreciate in future one-on-ones, in the agenda, having it be something that the employee knows I'm going to check in on. And that helps to remove any feelings of gotcha or trying to throw them off their game or things of that nature. And then you pivot into encourage. When things go well, give them that recognition. But you've now had the conversation. So as if things continue to devolve and you need to have ongoing conversations, it's much easier to bring it up again because you've already laid the foundation. But make sure it is an ongoing conversation. This isn't a once a year check in and suddenly derail everything because they didn't know they weren't doing well until just now. And also take advantage if your company offers it, entering the goals into a centralized place. Some companies have HRISs or performance management systems, and return to them on a quarterly basis to review.
On this point, Leslie, we just received a question if you want to elaborate further. The question reads, if you have weekly touch points, could you proactively talk about future scheduling and manage deliverables and gaps?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. If you have weekly touch points, could you proactively talk about future scheduling and manage deliverables and gaps?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think um, oftentimes we'll go into a one-on-one maybe without an agenda, but encouraging, whether this is a question from a manager perspective or an employee perspective, encouraging an agenda in advance. That way you have bullet points, you know you're going to talk about it. And if you don't, I would encourage starting one. Um, all of my direct reports, we have a weekly agenda where it doesn't have to be fully baked, but both parties throw their thoughts on what they want to cover during that meeting into the document in advance. I hope that answers the question.
I think that was helpful. Thank you. And I think it also helps to take away the uncertainty because I think a lot of the times, especially in delicate conversations, right, or interactions, it's the uncertainty element that causes the anxiety. So I think having things in writing, especially shared in advance, helps to address that and hopefully minimize any discomfort that you might have going into that conversation.
Right, exactly. It removes that feel, like I mentioned before, that feelings of gotcha. If my direct report looks at the agenda and knows I'm going to ask about this project, they're prepared to tell me about it, whether it's been delayed or put on the back burner or they haven't even started it yet. at least they know I'm going to ask and I'm not catching them off guard in the meeting. Okay. So taking those two frameworks, and there's millions of frameworks out there, but we're going to focus on those two. Um, I've pulled together a couple of scenarios that I figured we would walk through during our time together. But across both models, as you're preparing for higher stake conversations, again, assume positive intent. No one, I'd like to think that no one is showing up to work trying to sabotage the project or the company. If they are, probably don't try to manage this conversation yourself and skip right to talking to HR. But um, if you think about some of the reasons for poor performance, it could be lack of clarity about the task, or they don't have a good grasp on their priorities. And so they're prioritizing other things over um, whatever is causing the gap in performance. Or maybe it's a lack of resources or even a training issue. Maybe the person who um, trained them on an outdated process or something of that nature. So again, assume positive intent. Remember that you're on the same team. You both want success for this project or for the company. And so as you start to plan, think about what does a successful conversation look like? Keeping the end goal in mind can be really helpful in keeping the conversation from devolving into a tug of war agreement. You both want success at the end. And then something I want to call out too, this might not be available at everyone's company, but could HR, your talent team, be helpful? I know that at my company, my partner and I will have offer up off the record conversations and more like mock conversations. So if you're a people manager and you're entering into a high stakes conversation, talking to us a little bit about how to best prepare. I'll walk folks through one of those frameworks. Um, or if you're an employee and you're trying to manage up and you're struggling, sometimes it's helpful just to get a neutral perspective, or again, talk through a workshop, a conversation. Um, your HR department will let you know if this is a thing that they offer. We're comfortable doing it. And of course, if it can't be off the record, I'll be very upfront to say, like, actually, the things that you're telling me are concerning and I'll need to investigate them. But if it is something that they're willing to do, it could be a useful tool to keep in your back pocket. So I'm going to spend the rest of our session together just talking through a couple of specific scenarios. I've pulled these instances together based off of the submissions that came through. So thank you for taking the time to submit questions in advance. But we'll start with addressing tight deadlines or complex projects. So this first scenario is more peer-to-peer. We have all been there, I am sure. You're collaborating cross-functionally, a peer repeatedly misses follow-ups, and you're cleaning up loose ends all over the place before the leadership meeting. So this is peer-to-peer. I would lean on the 4P model. So the first P, purpose. What do you want from this conversation? Is reliable execution, a preserved working relationship. You certainly don't want it this escalated to leadership and just more shared accountability. You certainly don't want to vent your frustration or to win or throw anyone under the bus. There's no winning there. The second P, perspective. So, what might be happening on their side? Again, this is the assuming positive intent. Maybe they have competing priorities that they haven't communicated, or they think that you're supposed to own these things, and so there's lack of clarity on ownership, or they're not realizing the impact that they're having as a result. So going into that third P, proof, this is where you lean on fact. So if you were to start with story, they're unreliable, they don't care, they just want me to do all the work. When the facts are, okay, in the last two meetings, slides weren't updated in time. The status updates were incomplete on their side before it was due to leadership. And I had to work late the night before all of these meetings to finalize the material. Those are facts. So then we shift into plan. And what you can lead with as you're meeting with this peer is, hey, I want to align on how we're preparing materials for the leadership meetings. In the last two updates, the slides weren't finalized until the night before. I ended up having to complete them, which has created some last minute pressure. Let's sit down and clarify ownership and timelines going forward. Why does this work? It's anchored in facts and observable data. It's focused on process, not the individual's character, and it invites collaboration. And so all of this preserves that peer relationship. They're going to want to collaborate in the shared success. In that same realm of addressing tight deadlines, more from a managing up perspective, this scenario, which I know we've all been there before, your manager frequently shifts priorities. On Monday, you hear it's urgent. On Wednesday, you hear actually pause. And on Friday, they come back to you. Where is it? Why isn't this done? So you are ever growing frustrated and reactive, and you're tempted to say, like, if you know so much, why don't you just take it back over? So, again, managing up, we're going to lean on the four P's. Purpose, what are you looking for? Clear prioritization, reduced rework, maybe better visibility into what's going on, and to strengthen your working relationship with your manager. You don't want to criticize them or call out the fact that they're being inconsistent, that there's no way to win in that situation. So, perspective, what are some things that are happening on their side? Maybe they're reacting to executive pressure. They're getting new information that's coming in rapidly that they don't have time to cascade down quite yet. They don't realize the cost of needing to rework or pivot. And so, in think grounding yourself in this, you're ready to come into the conversation with a little bit more patience. So, third P, proof. The facts are you paused this project twice in the last 2 weeks. I've spent 6 hours reworking decks because the direction keeps changing, and deadlines for my other projects have slipped as a result. And so when we go into our opening line during the one-on-one with our manager, we can pause and say, I want to make sure I'm aligning to the team's highest priorities. In the last 2 weeks, Project A shifted direction a few times, which required some rework and impacted some other deadlines. I'd like to sit down and clarify how you'd like me to handle priority changes when they do come in. And this will help, you're putting it all out there. It's from a team perspective, and it's not attacking, again, someone's character. So let's pivot into the next one, giving feedback without damaging trust. This is from the perspective of a manager to a direct report. So you have a strong, capable team member. They contribute great ideas, but in meetings, they interrupt their peers. They answer questions that are directed at others. They tend to speak first and take up the most amount of space. They speak the longest. And as a result, you're noticing that your other direct reports in these meetings have become quieter, and you want to preserve engagement of the entire team without damaging physiological safety on the team as a whole. So, because this is looking to course correct, we're going to lean on the DIME model. D for describe, so we'll stick to the observable facts. I want to, in my opening line in this situation, be like, I want to talk about our last two team meetings In both sessions, you jumped in to answer questions directed at others and spoke several times before others had a chance to respond. This removes labels, this removes character judgments. We're not starting out with maybe our story, which is something along the lines of we need to talk about your attitude, you're dominating meetings, you're always interrupting people, what's going on? Because that is going to immediately trigger defensiveness, and we're just not going to get as far in the conversation. So that was D for describe, shifting into inquire, invite their perspective in. What's your intention when you step in so quickly? Or I'm curious about how you're thinking about your role in these meetings. Again, this helps to reduce the defensiveness. It helps to surface intent versus accusations. You don't care about collaboration. Um, and oftentimes you'll hear things along the lines of, I was trying to help, silence makes me uncomfortable, or I thought no one else had an answer. Okay, great. Now you're in a dialogue, you're not in an accusation. So we'll pivot, like now we know the gap, let's pivot into manage. Um, and we'll set the intent and standards going forward. So you could say something like, I really value your expertise and the contributions that you make. At the same time, when responses come in quickly from one person, others on the team may not feel comfortable to collaborate or contribute. And when we take a look at your growth in this role, a piece of it is helping to elevate the full team. So you're managing expectations, you're talking about how they're the growth in their role, and you're setting some cultural expectations, and you're not punishing the behavior. So we've managed, we're now going to move into E, encourage, and we'll end with growth. So let's experiment in this next meeting that we have together. When I call on others, please wait and respect the fact that I've called on somebody else. When a question is open to the group, wait 5, 10 seconds before responding or allowing me to invite someone else to respond first. I think doing so would significantly strengthen the team dynamic. This helps to keep dignity intact, and you've now set that expectation. In your next one-on-one with this person, you can celebrate the growth that you're seeing, or you can continue to lean on the fact that you've had this conversation and revisit it if you need to. Hey, we went into this team meeting and I'm continuing to see that you're interrupting, that you're stepping in and not letting others speak. Um, let's try it again, or we need to set some stricter boundaries. And I'm looking at the time, Dee. Just want to make sure I'm good to keep going through these examples.
No, we're very good on time.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm. Just a reminder, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function to submit those. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. It was also my excuse to take a quick water break. So we'll move into discussing boundaries and workload. Next scenario is a managing up. You're at or beyond capacity. Your manager just added another high priority project, and you don't want to appear resistant, but you're juggling too much at this point. You find yourself venting to your colleagues, and you're just about ready to scream, I can't take on anything else. I'm overwhelmed. So you know that it's time for a conversation because you're venting to your colleague. So you're probably avoiding one to begin with. So because this is managing up, we'll lean on the 4 Ps. What are you looking for in purpose? Is sustainable performance, clear prioritization, and continued trust. You don't want to continue complaining or resent your manager or to avoid responsibility. You want to be a team player, but it's just too much at this point. So, second P, perspective. What might be happening from your manager's perspective? Again, similar to the other scenario, maybe they're getting some pressure from above. maybe they think you have capacity and they just don't have visibility into your workload, um, which, is you don't want to hear, right? You'd like to think that your manager has a good grasp on what's on your plate, but that's not always the case. So we'll pivot into proof. What are our facts? I'm currently managing 4 active deliverables. 2 of these have deadlines within the next 5 days. And because of all of this current workload, I've been putting in 60 hours a week. Um, we want to stick with those facts as opposed to the story and emotion. And we don't want to lead with, my manager doesn't care about burnout. They just keep piling things on. If you're hearing yourself saying those things and wanting to incorporate them into your plan, that's the emotion talking. Stick to the facts. So, last P, plan. What is your opening line? During your one-on-one with your manager, you could go in with, I'm committed to delivering high quality work. Right now, I'm managing these 4 deliverables, 2 of which are due in the next 5 days. Um, you've asked me to start this new project. What do the what do the deadlines look like? And can you help me clarify which should take my attention? What's priority? And so ultimately, what this helps to show is that you have, um, I guess something else you could also say is, given given my current capacity, I'm going to need to shift things around in order to protect the quality of my work. And how would you like me to prioritize? And so it's showing that you have strong ownership and strong pride in your work and your output, which when you phrase it that way, you're showing that you have the best interests of the company at heart, and it helps to force any trade-offs into the open. If I'm going to work on this, these other things need to fall by the wayside. So help me understand what's the most important, and it preserves the relationship with your manager. Okay, and then finally, everyone's favorite salary conversations. Always uncomfortable, always necessary. In this scenario, I am doing from a manager to a direct report. Um, so you have a solid performer who is scheduling time and saying, I'd like to discuss increasing my compensation. I'd like to hope they'd be a little bit more specific in their ask, but um, play along with me here in this made up scenario. Uh, so in this scenario, you may agree that they're strong, but you have budget constraints, or maybe they're not performing at the level that you would expect in order to merit an increase. And maybe you're unsure of what criteria the Human Resources Department needs. And ultimately, the goal is to preserve trust, preserve clarity, provide clarity and avoid any vague promises because that can lead to disengagement. So, because we are doing a manager to a direct report, it's the dime model. First, describe. So let's start with some clarity around process and the current reality. When you do meet with them, thank you for raising this. Let's walk through how compensation decisions are made and where things currently stand. If it's a performance-based gap that exists, um, do some research ahead of time. What tools do you have in your pocket that you can help point to those gaps? Is it previous conversations where you've outlined the fact that a gap exists or a job description that you can lean on? Some companies have career frameworks that outline expectations in the current role as well as what growth looks like. So you could say something, at your current level, ownership of project X and Y outcomes is expected over the past few quarters. I've seen strong performance in X, but some opportunities in Y. And so we're not going in with I don't have a budget, or it's just not possible, or leadership or HR won't allow it. The reason I don't like those is if you're managing someone in the organization, try to own the decisions that you're making when there's a performance gap as best as possible, because it's your decision. Pointing upward or to a different department um, only increases distrust in the organization. So if this is your decision, own it. Um, and shifting into I inquire, you can always ask, can you share what's prompting this request? Maybe they've taken on some responsibilities that you had forgotten about or you weren't aware of. Maybe they're going to Glassdoor and getting some unreliable information and thinking that they're outside of the market range. Maybe they've gotten a competing offer and they're trying to negotiate before accepting. But understanding where the request comes from can certainly help in the conversation. So, pivoting over to M, manage, if the answer is not yet, you could talk through, in order to advocate for an increase, this is what I would need to see. Uh, if it's and those are great in the instances of performance gaps. If it's a budget concern or a timing concern, certainly lean on that. Our increase cycle happens in May of every year. So while I don't have flexibility this quarter, let's examine some responsibilities or some expectations that would position you strongly when that review does come around. And that helps to shift things from straight up no to here's what's next. And then to close things out with E, encourage, ultimately, and this is where leading with empathy comes into play. What this person is doing is brave. They're advocating for themselves, especially if they're more entry level in their role. So even if the outreach or the timing is all wrong, I still like to acknowledge the fact that they brought it up and they're advocating for themselves. So I will say something like, I value your contributions and your willingness to advocate for yourself. Let's make sure we have a clear path forward, maybe even scheduling a meeting in 90 days to talk about progress on the observed gaps of that conversation. So even if the answer is not now, the quality of your clarity will help determine, whether they're staying engaged. You're saying, let's work on these things. Um, and then we have a clear follow-up plan. So the DIE model can help you manage those expectations going forward and help build a structure where you are taking them seriously and building a roadmap to ensure you're following up. And I know that that follow-up piece was one of the questions that came in from the submitted questions. So I hope that that part was helpful. Okay, you've done all of this prep work. You've taken the time to jot down all your notes. You are sticking to the facts. You are assuming positive intent. You've done all the right prep work and emotions still run hot. The conversation is derailing right in front of you. What do you do? I want to remind you that you have permission to pause. That is always an option. I have found some managers are so dead set on solving the problem in one conversation that it becomes a zero-sum game. And as emotions escalate, it pivots into this I have to win model, and nobody wins when that's the case. So you have this permission to pause, reset. You can say something along the lines of, we're here to work together towards a solution. I think we need to take a pause and allow both of us to cool down. So let's put a pin in this for now, but I will find time to regroup in a few days and we can work through this together. Same team, we're putting some distance on the topic and we can come back when cooler heads prevail. And as a manager, remember the important part is regrouping. Do not let things end on this note. make sure you're getting the regroup on the calendars as soon as possible. So, with that, I will close with this, your conflict playbook. Make sure you're regulating yourself, preparing intentionally, leaning on those models we went through. Separate your facts from your stories and emotion. Align on a shared outcome and work together to define next steps. And ultimately, you'll find the real problem isn't necessarily the conflict, it's the ambiguity. And that all comes back to the clarity is kindness. And remember, there could be ambiguity about expectations, priorities, standards, ownership. And when conversations are mismanaged, that's when we see the burnout, the disengagement, the quiet resentment, and the turnover. And none of these start with one big blow up. They usually start with avoided conversations and lack of clarity. And avoiding those hard conversations is always higher. The cost is always higher than the discomfort of having them. So I hope these talk tracks and these frameworks were helpful and proved to be helpful as you navigate your careers. If you want to take your understanding a step forward, I've included some further resources. Some of these books were actually required reading during my time at BU, and they have continued to be reliable resources ever since. They sit in my library in my office here. I wanted to close, just thank you for your time, and Dee, I will pass it back to you.
Perfect. I think for now we can keep this slide on in case our audience members want to take notes. Um, I mean, I learned so much, Leslie, so thank you so much. And one of the things that was especially insightful for me was the importance of empathy in all of this, right? Like in both the 4P model as well as the dime model, we're trying to understand the perspective of the other and where they, um, you know, where they might be coming from, which I think is helping to build the trust for us to then have those really tough conversations. And I found that to be quite insightful. And then also that it's never about communication skills alone. It's really about that emotion and the power dynamics, so the uncertainty factors that I think is convoluting and making all of this really difficult. Um, all right, so Uma asks, can you please go back to the slide on when conversations go sideways? There we go. Do you have a follow-up question, Uma? Please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function. One question that I had as our audience members are thinking of questions, how how do you keep someone engaged if they become defensive? So let's say, that we do all of this, and I'm thinking of like the dime model, and we've done the describe, we've inquired and help me understand like what has gone wrong here, etc. And then we do the sort of the manage and setting the intent and the way forward. And despite all of our good intentions, we're noticing our direct report get a little bit defensive. What would be the best way to handle that?
Yeah, and I think that it's to be expected. It's hard to take feedback or to have your intent questioned. I would say my first go-to in that same conversation would be a reminder on the goals of the conversation and how shared success is the goal. I'm not in this conversation to point fingers or to question their character. These are the things that I've noticed. We need to get this work done and we're going to do it together. We're going to work together. And that can often cut down on the defensiveness. Um, Again, if it does escalate to a point where further conversations just not productive in the moment, you can say, um, like this is getting pretty heated. Let's pause and revisit, but close with that shared vision and that shared goal. Like we are one team. We're here to do this together. Um, and I have found that usually helps.
Thank you for that. Have you had any instances where the other person did not necessarily want to engage? Because I think this model assumes that they'll want to engage, right? And we are assuming good intent and we really want to preserve the relationship. But then have you had instances where this hasn't necessarily clicked?
Yes.
Okay.
Um, so a couple of things, and this is a really good call out. I would say when you're talking about a gap in performance where addressing it needs to happen sooner rather than later, you can, so you're leaving a meeting, it didn't go according to plan, you know you need to talk to this person about it. You could pull them aside and say, um, hey, I'd like to give you some feedback about some things I observed during that meeting. Um, I'll find time, but let me know if that time doesn't work so that you're not blindsiding them with the dime model, and they know to expect the feedback. I have found that often helps. Or if I'm trying to think if there's any other examples. I think putting, a little teaser in your agenda as well, but giving folks a heads up, especially when it relates to giving feedback or like, isn't it, hey, I have some observations, is now a good time? Because I've also found too, when you go into one-on-ones, um, they may not hear the things that you're saying as constructive feedback. But if you preface it with I'd like to give you some constructive feedback, or I'd like to give you some feedback on what I observed, things of that nature, then their ears perk up like, oh, wait a second. And they listen differently as opposed to it being a little bit more, okay, yep, got it, like on to the next thing.
That is such helpful reframing. Thank you so much, Leslie. Do we have any other questions from our audience members? What I have found most helpful is the importance, I think, of starting with neutrality and the inquiry, right, versus judgment, which I think so many of us are prone to, and that always keeping in mind that the goal is not necessarily to win the conversation, but to really preserve that relationship. And I think both the 4P and the dime are quite helpful. Though I do think, like any skill, right, it takes a lot of practice to get there. I think you made it look very easy as you were sharing like some of the scripts that you use as you kind of work your way through the model. But I think that for the rest of us, I think we need to sort of work and stretch that muscle.
Yeah, and I find that as you continue in your journeys, as you become managers, it may be different scenarios, but the talking points are very similar versions of themselves. And so the more difficult conversations you have to enter into, the more you realize that you're, repeating similar phrasing or you're asking similar questions. And it does get easier to manage. Personalities will always dictate how easy it is to actually have the conversation, but you're not starting from scratch.
Yeah, 100%. I think that the language absolutely matters. Thinking, things like I think you mentioned this, like I've noticed
Mhm.
this happening versus you always or you never, or things like, from my perspective, here's what I'm noticing. Would you agree with that? Or can we explore this together? And then also, I took notes here, especially in the 4P model. In the plan of that 4P, there's a lot of co-designing happening at the end where you together collaboratively work on devising a solution and devising the action steps, which is great. So we have Peter Dakotas. He writes, "Thank you so much. This has been helpful. You said in your last example that you could say something like, I'd like to share some feedback with you. I have been told that it works better if you ask if they're open to feedback. Slight difference, but makes it their decision. And sometimes they aren't ready to hear that feedback."
Yeah, also a great line. I think it's really dependent on your relationship with the person, what the situation is, but either of those are great.
Okay, perfect. So I see that let me see. I think we just received one more question. All right. Could you start the conversation with a positive observation and then add the constructive feedback to help them grow? Sort of like that sandwich feedback model. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a love-hate with the feedback sandwich. I think it's really dependent on the person you're talking to. If anyone has ever gone through like a DISC assessment or is familiar with the DISC assessment, there are certain personalities that just want to know what the feedback is and offering up some praise or recognition in advance of that kind of it ends up being not as genuine or like fluffy. So I feedback sandwich is a thing for a reason. I think for some people it's great. I would take a look at who
Do
you're
better.
talking to.
Yeah. Love that. Perfect. Do we have any other questions? Just have a few minutes left. If not, I do have a couple of announcements that I'd like to make before we close off. Um, Let me go ahead and share my screen really quickly. Okay, so we will be closing our virtual lunch and learns next month. We have two remaining sessions. One is on April 8th on managing up and across, how to build influence without formal authority, featuring Leslie Griffin, moderated by Donna Moy. And then we're hosting Maitreyi Shankar on April 29th to discuss how we can turn ChatGPT into our AI work assistant. In just a couple of weeks, we have our She Leads conference hosted by the Women's MBA Association, and I've put down some of the speaker lineup there. So we'd love for those of you who can join. We'd love to see you there. And then also at the end of this month, we are hosting a session on alumni perspectives on navigating uncertainty with Kate Barron, Ashley Jankowski, Lauren O'Hanlon, and Joe Turner, moderated by Paris Alston, and that's happening on March 24th, hosted by the Questrom Graduate Council. And all of these events are open to the entire Questrom community members. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. And then also, in case you're not doing so already, we have a very vibrant LinkedIn alumni group page. So do follow us there for daily updates, highlights, and news from Questrom alumni, as well as take a peek at our Questrom alumni website for additional resources for all of you. On that note, Leslie, thank you so much for such an engaging and insightful conversation. It has been incredibly delightful sharing this experience with you. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for being here and for your flexibility as we had to reschedule this. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much.